My name's Bob, and I have two brothers. My youngest brother? Well, let's just say he's not the sharpest tool in the shed. He's a short guy, only about 5 feet 3 inches, with red hair that started thinning fast, practically bald by the time he hit 22. He's got a quick temper, a sense of entitlement, and a long history of making terrible choices. We come from a family with a bit of money. Yeah, we were trust fund kids. But don't get me wrong, our trusts weren't anything crazy. They weren't enough to keep us set for life, but they did make things a little easier. And when we found ourselves in a tough spot, there was usually just enough to bail us out. My brother loved showing off his good fortune. He always had the latest gadgets, dressed sharp, and, get this, he was a total neat freak. I mean, the guy even ironed his underwear. But the one thing that really set him apart? His insane musical talent. He played keyboards, and if he heard a song even once, he could play it back note for note, anytime, anywhere. The guy could jam with the best of them. It was actually pretty incredible. He had a band, too. I think they called themselves the X-Rays, or something like that. They played bars and hotels all up and down the I-5, and they did all right. Mostly, they stuck to covers, but they wrote a few songs of their own. When they played the classics, the crowd went wild. But when they played their own stuff, silence. They were great at copying what worked, but not a single one of them, not my brother, not the others, could write anything original. Since he had money, my brother bankrolled the whole thing. He bought fancy effects equipment, so their shows always looked impressive. He even got them a van to haul their gear and get to gigs. He loved being in charge, but as a boss? He was a total jerk. They spent as much time on the road as they could. His first wife, Carol, had actually been dating the bass player before she got with my brother. She was hot, but in a trashy way. She traded the bass. She swapped out the bass player for the keyboard player, my brother. Turns out, she was a bit of a cover band groupie. I never even knew that was a thing. Apparently, she started out with the drummer. But she was also a gold digger, and the moment she realized my brother had some money, that was it, game over. Back in those days, I didn't have much contact with my brother, so I honestly don't know a whole lot about what their life was like. They dated for about 5 or 6 months, then out of nowhere, they announced they were getting married. Since I barely knew her, I didn't have any strong feelings about it. But the rest of the family? Yeah, let's just say they weren't exactly thrilled. The first real interaction I had with my brother's fiancée was at the end of their rehearsal dinner. The guys in the family were getting ready to head out for the bachelor party when she suddenly lost it, ranting, raving, full-on meltdown. She didn't want him going out to the clubs the night before the wedding. Now, I got where she was coming from, sure. But the thing is, she had already agreed to this plan. She had shot down every other suggested date until this was literally the only option left before the wedding. So throwing a fit about it now? That was just her being difficult, or maybe really insecure. Bottom line? She just didn't want him having a bachelor party. My brother came outside where the limos were waiting and said he couldn't go. I wasn't having that. I marched inside to talk to her. I laid it out plain and simple. I told her that my dad, my uncles, and a bunch of other family members had made time for this. Plus, some of those guys were pretty well off, and let's be real, they'd probably given them some pretty nice wedding gifts. She needed to be reasonable. I also promised her nothing was going to get out of hand. It felt like hours of tears, drama, and threats, but eventually she caved. What a nightmare. We headed out for the bachelor party, but honestly, it was a disaster. My little brother was so whipped, he barely even participated. He just sat at a table in the back, staring into his beer like his life was over. That kind of killed the vibe for everyone. I think we lasted less than an hour at the club before we called it. We piled back into the limos and took him home. By 10 p.m., he was tucked into bed like a little kid. Now, we had those limos for the whole night, and we'd all been looking forward to this for a while. The guys in my family don't get together all that often. I like to joke that the only times we all show up in one place are when we're getting married or burying someone. So, of course, we weren't about to waste the night. We jumped back into the limos and hit the town. And man, we had a blast. At one point, my dad was tossing around $100 bills like confetti. He even ended up with 3 dancers giving him a private show. My Uncle Jack got lucky with one of the dancers in his limo. Uncle John? Yeah, he got himself arrested. My cousin Fred went all in on the booze and disappeared for most of the night. Meanwhile, my other brother got sick, right onto a dancer, no less, while sitting front row. For a bachelor party without an actual bachelor, it was definitely one for the books. My brother, though? He completely missed out. The rest of us almost missed the wedding. I'm pretty sure the only 2 people who weren't nursing brutal hangovers the next day were my brother and the priest. Still, the wedding happened, they said their vows, and just like that, they were hitched. She moved in with my brother, bringing her 3-year-old son, Charlie, with her. Life moved on. A couple of years later, I needed my brother to sign some papers. I called him up, and we agreed to meet later that day. He told me he'd be around the house, but he might step out to run some errands. If he wasn't home when I got there, he said, I should just hang out. He wouldn't be gone long. A few hours later, I swung by his place. It was one of those perfect September afternoons. It was the 80s, and the weather that day was perfect. Warm, bright, just one of those beautiful September afternoons. When I pulled up to my brother's place, I noticed right away that the front door was wide open. Given the nice weather, that didn't seem too unusual. I stepped inside, calling out his name. No answer. The house was quiet. Too quiet. No sign of him, no noise from his dogs, and nothing from his stepson either. And let's be real, 5-year-old boys don't do quiet. That's when I spotted the coat rack, knocked over. A wine glass lay shattered on the floor. A bad feeling started creeping up my spine. I called my brother's name again. Still nothing. Then I glanced down the hallway, and that's when I saw it. Torn fabric. A ripped blouse. Somewhere in the back of the house, I heard noises. My stomach twisted. I followed the sound, stepping cautiously down the hall. I peeked into the kids' room. It was a mess, but that wasn't exactly a red flag. What spoiled 5-year-old's room isn't? No sign of the kid, though. On instinct, I grabbed his little baseball bat. It wasn't much, but it was something. Past the bathroom, I slowed down. I could hear it now, grunting, smacking sounds. I stopped at my brother's bedroom doorway. Heart pounding, I peered inside. There she was, his wife, tied to the bed, a gag stuffed in her mouth. Her eyes were glazed over, barely registering anything. And then there was him. A massive guy. Built like a damn mountain, all rippling muscle. And he was hurting her. Bad. She let out a weak, choking noise. I yanked back from the doorway, mind racing. For a split second, just a split second, I actually thought about walking away. She wasn't exactly my favorite person. But, damn it, I couldn't just leave her there. She was my brother's wife. And that meant I had to do something. I took a deep breath. I only had one shot at this. And all I had was a flimsy little kid's baseball bat. Too short, too light, no way to get a good 2-handed swing. I could already see it, me snapping the bat over this guy's back, and then getting my ass handed to me. Meanwhile, the bastard kept going. He was yelling, growling, getting rougher. I had no more time to think. It was now or never. I crept into my brother's bedroom, heart pounding. Jesus, this guy was huge. Built like a damn tank. And he was hurting her. Oh hell. Oh hell. I was going to die. I lined up my shot, swung my arm way back, and brought that little baseball bat down with everything I had. The hit landed perfectly, right on his most sensitive spot. The bat shattered on impact, leaving me holding nothing but a 7-inch splintered handle. The guy shot up in the air. He didn't scream, but I swear I heard the air blast out of his lungs. He hit the bed halfway, his chest slamming against the mattress while his knees stayed on the floor. Then, like dead weight, he collapsed with a heavy thud. For a second, I thought I'd actually killed him. Then I saw his body twitching. I let out a breath. Thank God. I didn't want to be a murderer. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I'm at my brother's house. His wife was being attacked. I need police and medical help now. But before I could say anything else, I fumbled the phone and dropped it. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The guy, this monster, was moving. I stumbled back, watching in horror as the side of his face shifted. His bulging eye, which had been clouded over, slowly cleared, and then it turned, locking onto me. Oh, hell! I was really going to die. Frantically, I looked around for something, anything, to defend myself. My fingers tightened around the broken handle of the bat, but it was useless. And he was getting up. On his hands and knees now, he groaned, sucking in deep breaths. And the way he looked at me, pure, murderous rage. He lunged. I screamed, actually screamed, like a terrified little kid. Without thinking, I drove my foot straight into his groin as hard as I could. He dropped instantly, hitting the floor like a sack of bricks. I didn't waste a second. I scrambled to the bed, working to untie the silk tie binding her right arm. She was coming around, her eyes looking clearer now. We had to get out, fast, before this bastard got up again. I had no idea how he even managed to get up that first time. I was sure I'd wrecked him with that baseball bat. I mean, how was he still moving? At that point, I wasn't even convinced the guy was human. I glanced down at my sister-in-law. She didn't look dazed anymore, just furious. Her eyes were wide open, locked on me, burning with rage. She was making a ton of noise, but with the ball gag still in her mouth, I couldn't make out a single word. She thrashed against the ties so violently that untying her was nearly impossible. Her face twisted in anger, spit dribbling from her mouth as she let out muffled screams. She bucked and flailed like she was possessed. I figured she was just in shock from the attack. Then, I heard the front door burst open. The cops had arrived. "Back here!" I shouted. Within seconds, the room was packed with officers. The bastard on the floor was starting to stir. "Oh God!" he groaned, his voice thick with pain. Then came the moaning, the mumbling, the sobbing, the gurgling. Everything became a blur of shouting, guns drawn, and chaos. Next thing I knew, I was in handcuffs, being led out as the EMTs rushed in. They stuck me in the back of a squad car while one of the cops leaned in and asked me what had happened. I ran through it all. The open front door, the knocked-over coat rack, the wine glass on the floor, the torn blouse, then finding my sister-in-law being attacked. Right around then, they wheeled the bastard out and loaded him into an ambulance. 15 minutes later, the EMTs helped my brother's wife outside, wrapped in a blanket. She turned and looked at me. The hate in her eyes was scorching. It was unsettling. Really unsettling. Damn. That guy must have really messed her up. I sat there in the car for what felt like half an hour before one of the officers strolled over. He had this smug little smirk on his face. "We gotta take you down to the station," he said as he slid into the driver's seat. The cops all seemed to find the situation hilarious. I guess my little slugger bat had done a real number on the guy. I had wrecked that guy completely. Whatever was left of him, well, it wasn't much. His anatomy had been torn apart in more places than I could count. Basically, I shattered him. But to really understand who he was, you have to go back to his childhood. Mick had been a scrawny kid. A wiry, awkward thing. But there was one part of him that wasn't small. Back in grade school, after gym class, the boys would hit the showers together. That's when they'd notice Mick was different. And, being kids, they laughed. At 6 or 7 years old, none of them really understood what it would mean when they got older. They just thought it was weird. And kids can be brutal. 4 years, the teasing and bullying never let up. Mick, though, found his escape at the local gym. Lifting weights became his thing. It was just him and the iron, every single day. By the time he hit 15, his body had transformed, rock solid, pure muscle. Then he shot up to 6 feet 5 inches, and suddenly, everything about him looked proportional. But no matter how much muscle he packed on, deep down, that scrawny, humiliated little kid still lived inside him. By the time he was 25, though, Mick looked like a damn god. Women fell over themselves when he walked into a room. And he had a type, married women. Somewhere in that twisted mind of his, every wife he slept with was payback for all the guys who had tormented him when he was young. The married women in town whispered about Mick, and what he was working with. Those whispers spread like wildfire. And for Mick, life was good. One afternoon, he was tangled up with some random married woman when, during a brief pause, he noticed someone watching from next door. A woman, marching toward his house with clear intent. Her name was Carol. She'd been in her backyard when she heard it, her neighbor, Mabel, practically screaming with pleasure. Through the sliding glass doors that opened into the bedroom, Carol had seen everything. And now, flushed with excitement, she was headed straight for the action. Mick turned back toward Mabel, who, breathless and desperate, reached for him. "Come back," she pleaded. But Mick had already locked eyes with Carol, and he was very interested. Mick turned back and pulled open the door for Carol. Up close, she was even more impressed. Standing before her was 6 feet 5 inches of pure, rippling muscle, 225 pounds of sculpted perfection. In all her years, through all the different men she'd been with, she had never seen anything like him. He was, quite literally, the man of her dreams. She gazed up into his piercing blue eyes, her voice breathless. "I want you," she said. "Right now." Her legs felt weak, her heart racing, but the excitement pushed her forward. Mick, however, barely reacted. This kind of thing happened to him all the time. And sure, Carol was attractive, but she wasn't exactly special. Her chest was a little small, and she had a trashy vibe. He smirked, shaking his head. "Look, lady, no offense, but unless you've got something really special to offer, I'm already busy with this one," he said, motioning to Mabel. "Maybe some other time." With that, he slid the door shut, turned around, and went right back to what he was doing. Hard. Carol stood there, stunned. No man had ever told her no. It just didn't happen. But this one? This man? She needed him. Something inside her snapped. She started screaming, pounding her fists against the glass. "You have to be with me," she shrieked. "Everyone wants to be with me." Mick ignored her. Mabel, at this point, was barely coherent, on the edge of what was about to be the most intense experience of her life. But Carol's banging and screaming? That was starting to get on his nerves. With an irritated sigh, Mick pulled away from Mabel, who let out a desperate whimpering sound, and stalked over to the sliding door. He yanked it open. "Look, sweetheart," he said flatly. "You don't have anything I want. Go home to your husband." Carol's face twisted in desperation. "Please," she begged. "Please be with me." Mick raised an eyebrow. "Why should I?" Carol's voice trembled. "You can do anything you want to me," she whispered. Mick had heard this 1,000 times before. Some women just refused to take no for an answer. He sighed. "All right, princess," he muttered. "Go home, pour me a glass of wine. I'll come over when I'm finished here." Mick slid the door shut, turning back to Mabel, whose chest was rising and falling in anticipation. Without hesitation, he picked up right where they had left off. Outside, Carol stood frozen, watching. Seeing her neighbor with Mick only fueled her excitement. She couldn't tear her eyes away. Mick glanced over his shoulder, locked eyes with her, and mouthed, "Get going. You're next." That was all Carol needed. She rushed home. When she walked in, her husband was in the living room, playing with their son and the dogs. "Go to the dog park," she ordered, barely stopping. "Then take little Charlie for some ice cream. I need you out, now, and don't come back until dinner." Her husband blinked in confusion. "But I've got a—" She stomped her foot. "Go. Now." That was all it took. Carol's husband, who was, by all accounts, a pushover, immediately backed down. "Okay, dear." A few minutes later, Carol was shoving her husband, her kid, and both dogs out the front door. She stood in the doorway, smiling as they loaded into their brand-new Cadillac Escalade and pulled out of the driveway. 15 minutes later, just as he'd promised, Mick arrived. Carol had changed into a short skirt and a semi-sheer blouse. She had picked up the kids' toys, tossing them all into Charlie's room, and poured 2 glasses of wine. She was ready. The moment Mick stepped through the open front door, Carol launched herself at him. One of the wine glasses tipped over and shattered. The two of them slammed into the coat rack by the door, sending it crashing to the floor. Mick barely reacted. "All right, miss," he said coolly, gripping her shoulders. "Here's what's gonna happen." He reached forward, ripped her blouse clean off, and tossed it aside. "First, I'm going to take you," he continued. "And if I'm pleased, then maybe, we'll see about more." Carol let out a breathless whimper, her body trembling with anticipation. Mick had been through this plenty of times before. Most housewives couldn't handle him, not even close. Usually, there was screaming, crying. Mick didn't like distractions. He had learned over time that the easiest way to keep things quiet was with a gag. He reached into his pocket and pulled one out, a smooth, black ball gag. Holding it up, he watched as Carol's eyes went wide. Carol's stomach fluttered with nerves, but more than that, excitement. She was the kind of woman who loved to talk, who lived to boss men around. For her to accept a gag? That was completely out of character. And yet, when Mick held it up, she opened her mouth without hesitation, letting him push the ball gag between her lips. That alone said everything about how badly she wanted this. He fastened the gag tight, then grabbed her by the wrist and dragged her to the master bedroom. Without ceremony, he tossed her onto the bed, reached for a couple of her husband's silk ties, and secured her wrists to the headboard. Then he got to work. For Carol, the experience was agony. Pain, sharp, overwhelming, shot through her body. It only got worse. White-hot fire lanced through her, tearing a scream from her throat. The screaming didn't stop. For over 5 of the longest, most excruciating minutes of her life, she screamed into the gag as Mick wrecked her. And then Mick felt pain too. A pain so explosive, so sudden, that his whole world shattered. His vision went black. His groin, it wasn't just pain. It felt like it had exploded. When he finally regained consciousness, the agony was so intense he couldn't even see straight. His vision swam, but as his eyes started to clear, he caught sight of a man standing over him. A man holding the broken remains of a kid's baseball bat. Mick had no idea who he was. Then again, with his history, it wasn't hard to guess. Probably another husband. He smirked to himself. Mick loved dealing with husbands. He loved breaking them, humiliating them, making them watch as their wives begged for more. Even if they didn't leave, even if they tried to fight, they never came after him again. And more often than not, their wives still came back. Mick sucked in a breath, shifting onto his hands and knees, shaking off the blinding pain in his groin. It was bad, the worst pain he'd ever felt. But whoever this guy was, he was going to pay. Mick pushed himself upright and turned to face him. The guy's eyes went wide. Almost as wide as Carol's had been when she'd watched him with Mabel. Mick grinned. This wimp was terrified, exactly as he should be. Then, before Mick could make a move, the guy screamed like a little girl and drove his foot straight into what was left of Mick's groin. And just like that, the lights went out. Mick collapsed in a heap on the bedroom floor. When he came to, he was in a hospital bed, his wrists cuffed to the rails. A cop sat in the corner, watching him. As soon as Mick's eyes fluttered open, the officer leaned out the door and called for the nurses. Within moments, they flooded into the room. They adjusted his pillows, speaking in hushed, sympathetic voices, doing their best to make him comfortable. All of them were women, and every single one of them looked devastated. A little while later, the doctor came in. Mick listened, along with the hovering nurses, as the doctor laid it all out. The damage was catastrophic. Apparently, there were 123 massive ruptures. His anatomy was beyond repair. It was so bad that the doctor said, in no uncertain terms, Mick would never function again. As if that wasn't bad enough, his groin had been utterly pulverized. The baseball bat had already done serious damage, but when the kick landed, it completely scrambled everything. There was no coming back from it. The doctor explained, in a calm, clinical tone, that certain parts had been removed entirely. Mick was lucky to be alive, sure. But the best he could hope for now? Being able to use the bathroom. And even that came with problems. Because of the ruptures, things wouldn't exactly come out in a straight line anymore. As the reality of it sank in, the nurses exchanged horrified whispers. Word spread fast. Women across town wept. Those who had been with him mourned what was lost. Those who hadn't sobbed for what they would never have. Meanwhile, the men of the town? They smiled. Back to my perspective. Eventually, the whole truth came out. Carol was just another cheating housewife Mick had added to his list. She had been badly injured, so much so that she'd be wearing adult diapers for the rest of her life. And Mick? He was ruined. He quit weightlifting. All that muscle turned to fat. Mick's downfall. These days, Mick weighs in at around 450 pounds, and honestly, that might be an understatement. The man who once walked into a room and made women weak in the knees now makes people gasp for air, but for all the wrong reasons. His anatomy? Completely useless. His legendary physique? Buried under layers of fat. And the worst part? His bathroom situation. You always knew when Mick had been in the restroom. It didn't matter how careful he tried to be. His plumbing was so wrecked that things just sprayed. The walls, the floor, even the ceiling, nothing was safe. And Mick? He'd just waddle out of the bathroom looking defeated, like even he had given up on himself. Once upon a time, women lined up to be with him. Now, he's a walking cautionary tale. Life doesn't just humble you. Sometimes, it annihilates you. My side of things. Even after everything, I still had to deal with court. So I did what any smart person would do. I hired the best lawyers money could buy. The kind of guys who could convince a judge that the Titanic didn't actually sink. And our defense? Simple. I thought I was saving my sister-in-law from an assault. How the hell was I supposed to know it was consensual? Then my lawyers pulled their biggest move yet. They hinted to the DA that if this case went to trial, we'd stack the jury with married men. Men who had been cheated on. Men who had been lied to. Men who had spent years waking up in cold sweats, wondering, is my wife out there with some guy like Mick? Yeah, not exactly the crowd that was going to sympathize with Mick. And the DA? He knew it. Then, just when things couldn't get any better, we found out something even juicier. Mick had slept with the DA's wife. That was it. No charges. Case closed. But Mick, oh, he wasn't done. He tried to sue me. So there we were, in civil court. I looked at the jury. 9 married men, 2 women. Both lesbians. And the verdict? Guilty. And the compensation? $1 freaking dollar. I actually laughed out loud in court. Sometimes, karma works faster than expected. But you know what really shocked me? My brother. That moron actually took her back. Forgave her. Brought home the woman who had humiliated him, cheated on him with half the town, and was now permanently in adult diapers. I told you, he makes terrible choices. At that point, it wasn't even about love. It was just pathetic. Nobody could believe it. Not our family. Not our friends. Not even Mick. I swear, even Mick had this look on his face like, damn, man, even I wouldn't take her back. And yet there they were, pretending everything was normal. Like none of this had ever happened. Like she hadn't just been caught tied to a bed with a ball gag in her mouth. Like she hadn't just ruined her own body beyond repair. Like my brother wasn't the world's biggest idiot. Some people just love suffering. The aftermath. Mick. Well, after the trial, things just kept getting worse for him. Word got around town fast. The once legendary sex god had been permanently defanged. The women who used to throw themselves at him now whispered behind his back. The men who used to hate him now laughed at him. And Mick? He went into hiding. He quit the gym. Quit his flashy lifestyle. And just disappeared. The next time I saw him, he was in a fast food drive-thru, struggling to fit behind the wheel of his truck. That once chiseled body? Gone. Now, he was just another guy who peaked too soon. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. And that's the end. So, that's the story. Did you see that coming? Or did this take a wild turn you never expected? Drop a comment below. I need to hear your thoughts. And hey, if this story kept you hooked, hit that like button. If you're new here, or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join the community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every single day, so go ahead, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. If you have any questions, TF you can write in the comments. And if you liked everything, you can support me with a like and a subscription. All the best to you.